welcome back everyone, and welcome to episode 5, season 2 of the Happy Teacher Pod. This time we have a very special guest speaker, Rebecca Leek, and we're going to be talking about how you grow a healthy school with happy teachers. So Rebecca Leek has done many roles within education. She's been a Senko, a head teacher, an executive head, amongst lots of other roles. She undertakes school reviews and provides advice and mentoring to school leaders. And she is currently writing a book, of which I think we're going to hear more about later. So we're very excited to hear the answers to some of the questions we've got for Rebecca. But first of all, we're going to go with Roxy's Break-time Banter, and I've no idea what she's got in store for us.
So I was thinking to myself, okay, we're talking to a head teacher, so I've got to think of something funny that happened with a head teacher. So for some reason, I find it really difficult to be able to have a normal conversation with the head teacher that I work for. I don't know why. Maybe it's a power dynamic thing, but I seem to freeze whenever it seems to be a conversation. And the head teacher that me and Jenny used to work for, I don't think she was like an intimidating person, but she was like a super powerful kind of woman figure, and maybe I just felt slightly like in awe of her. So whenever she used to be like, oh, how was your holiday, like those generic questions like you have after a school holiday or whatever else. So one day, like, she was just talking to me, we were just chatting about, I don't even know what it was, and I think she asked me about a holiday, and she knew that I was Greek, and she started asking, she said she'd been on holiday in Greece. She was, oh my God, she was very flamboyant with her holidays, wasn't she, Jenny? Do you remember?
Yeah.
She used to fly off to like South America for the half term and all of this kind of stuff. And I remember she was just having a conversation with me. I went to Greece, and like, and I just froze. I just started talking about cheese, like literally, like that is all I could think to talk to her about, which is like halloumi cheese, so like halloumi or whatever the English people, however they pronounce it. But yeah, I literally was like, so we had a full-blown conversation about cheese because I was so like, I got so nervous around her that I just was thinking to myself, I've got to have a normal conversation with her. And before I knew it, we just had this whole conversation about cheese, and then she'd walked off and started talking to someone else, and I turned to one of my old colleagues, the one we used to work with, Jenny. Yeah. And I was just like, oh my God, I felt so panicked. I was like, I've just had a whole conversation with her about cheese. Like, what the hell is wrong with me? And to this day, even now, whenever like her name gets mentioned, I'm just like, oh yeah, do you remember that conversation about halloumi cheese that I had with
my old head teacher?
I just couldn't. Do you know what? My current head teacher is not. It's not as bad, but I do still tend to find it really difficult to like just make normal conversation with. I don't know if this is an everybody problem or if it's just a me problem.
It's quite interesting to have a head on the show, because I think I'm quite calm with head teachers, but I always think they're secretly doing my kind of assessment in the back, kind of in the back. Like, we think we're having a normal conversation, but I'm like,
but you're not.
Are you thinking whether I'm worthy of a promotion at the same time?
Yeah, overanalyzing.
Do you know what we're doing? We're panicking about the fact that we've got 3 job interviews to organise, and there's a policy that's been written, and we've had a complaint from a parent, and the fact that there's like damp in the brickwork somewhere in the corner of the school. That's what we're generally doing.
So you probably don't even remember that you're talking for 5 minutes about cheese. You're like, yep, fine, talk to me about cheese.
God, don't.
I'm also very vegan, so that would have been, yeah.
Well, I mean, that links very nicely to our first, well, I say that very nicely just because you're talking about being vegan, but a lot of what you're really passionate about is permaculture, and people listening might be wondering how that kind of relates to our podcast and teaching. So could you begin by speaking to us about permaculture and how it relates to leading a school?
Yeah, so people talk about lenses, don't they? And lenses through which people see things, and really formative experiences that they've had that then change the way they slightly see the world. And I just happen to have kind of grown up with growing, as in growing food around me, and have always been really interested in that. I had an allotment when I was at university, and so I've kind of become more and more knowledgeable about that area, and obviously met my husband through that, and now my partner is also really interested in that kind of thing. And so permaculture was something that really got cemented, if you like, in the late 70s in Australia, and it's a response really to the way that farming got incredibly intensive and trying to kind of control nature, get rid of all, clearing land and monocrop farming, and which sounds far away from schools, but then permaculture, you see, is a response to that actually says, let's stop trying to control it, because actually it's really intense and creates loads of input and actually is quite destructive. And rather go back again, almost back and forward, so going backwards back to nature, but also innovating as well. And how do we actually almost lean in to nature and harness what's already there to create, if you like, permanent agricultural solutions? So it's far better to have lots of trees in your growing area, or in whatever kind of environment, whether it's a garden or a farm or a small holding, because they act as an interconnector. They ensure that there's loads of wildlife, and we all know a bit more about biodiversity, but instead of kind of trying to make everything uniform and a kind of attacking and clearing and becoming quite kind of linear and military about, right, well, we need to clear that orchard because I want to grow wheat next. It's going, well, hold on a minute, there's already an orchard there, so there's already food source. It might not be producing because there might be old apple trees, but we know that apple trees grow there really well, so what should we do with that, and how do we then design around features that are already there? So it might sound a bit mad in terms of how is that a school, but I just cannot emphasize enough how the more you kind of read about permaculture, the more I think that you can then apply that to really healthy organizational leadership, because there's so much that you do about design of people's days, design of systems within schools, design of inclusive classroom practice and adaptive ways of teaching. And you've got 3 children there, but now we've got those 4 children, so how are we going to change what we do slightly? And permaculture is actually really about ways of thinking around design and working in a really healthy way with what you have, instead of kind of against what you're given.
So it's almost like a little bit like working with the organic side of it. It's almost like kind of what is organically already there, if I've understood it correctly, like what's organically already there, rather than trying to like shoehorn something into that space instead.
Exactly. If you've got clay soil, instead of trying to change that, you find out, well, what grows really well in clay soil, and if you've got a river nearby, how to manage your irrigation system so it just plays into that rather than kind of almost goes against it, and use what's already there. There's also...
That's so interesting. Sorry, go on. Sorry, I interrupted you.
I do have an allotment, and I'm still working on getting better at it. And you're making me think, I do have clay soil. I just need to admit I've got clay soil. I'm growing the wrong crops.
Really good for making a pond, clay soil, because it holds water. There's 3 ethics as well at the heart of permaculture, which are earth care, people care, and fair share. And the earth care, is just, we don't own the earth, we're part of it, and seeing that. So maybe not as applicable to schools, although it is in many ways. But I think it completely is. But and what you might do in the curriculum and what you might teach the children. But essentially, a lot of us are working in a school that's been built on a field, and there isn't that much we can do about it. Obviously there's things we can do as we build or think about the environment around us, but the fair share and the people care, particularly the fair share, I think is incredibly important, because we have got hierarchical systems and people who just take airspace. And I'm talking about a school leader, talking about meetings that we have, we're talking about staff rooms, and there's airspace that's taken up by certain people, and if we're not really careful, we just listen to them, and they do tend to be men, but that can happen. And so if you're not clear, or if you're not astute to that, then you just listen to them, and you don't notice that you're missing a whole part of your workforce, if you don't actively make sure that they're able to say what they want. And a really good example is changing the school hours, and you go, oh, let's change it from 8:45 to 8:30, you know, whatever. And because maybe the head teacher, it doesn't affect them, they can afford childcare, they've got a car, they're you know, etc. They're in a slightly more privileged position, and they ask a couple of their heads of department, and they go, what would be the impact of this in, you know, blah blah blah, and everyone says, oh yes, that's fine. But then they don't ask a huge part of the workforce, which might be the people who are on lesser pay, have a real strain in terms of childcare. They may also know the community better because they live amongst them. I'm talking about teaching assistants often, you know, obviously I'm stereotyping a bit, but, you know, we often get our teaching assistants from a local community. They often don't have the same income, same circumstances. And the impact on them is massive. And so if you at the top make these decisions without actually listening and thinking about that fair share of voice, and when you consult and make changes, then you could be being really destructive if you're not making sure that everyone is involved.
I think the consultation side of things is super important to me, because I was at a school where a new head teacher came in, and there basically ended up being zero consultation, and it was exactly what you were talking about, this idea that he was a man, unfortunately it didn't fit the stereotype, but he didn't contextualize the school. So what I've noticed since doing my NPQSL, funnily enough, is that he was trying to fit another school that he'd worked in, what he'd done there and what was successful there, which was in a different borough, which might not sound that far away because it was still in London or whatever else. So maybe he thought, oh, okay, it's going to work here because but it was a different borough, it was a different area, it was different context of students, staff, you know, all of this type of stuff. And he just tried to put all of the routines that had been successful at his other school, where he was deputy head, I believe, and it just didn't work at all, and it made everyone quite depressed because it was this thing of, let's just put it in, and it's definitely going to work here because it worked at the previous school. And it wasn't organic and it wasn't consultative, it was literally
just imposed.
We're going to do it, yeah, like completely imposed on us. And do you know what, let's use an environmental pun, like it completely destroyed the environment of the school. It just, you know, he wasn't watering the plants, so to speak, he was literally just destroying them, and he hadn't looked at the context of the school, and unfortunately he also made it very clear that he didn't really care if he lost loads and loads of staff, which he did. He pretty much lost all the staff that were at that school when I was there. You know, and it's really sad. It was really, really sad for me to watch because I'd been there a really long time, and I really loved the school. But yeah, it's one of those things.
There are 12 principles in permaculture, and one of them I often think about is the observe and interact one, which is, if you like, the opposite of what you've been describing. And so we do want to have an impact when we start in a new job, and I think it's reasonable, and making some little change that makes people's lives better, I think, is a really good thing to do when you step in.
Of course,
you know, what can I do for you? And everyone says more whiteboard pens, you know, it's like that's something you can do.
And it makes you different.
Yeah. But you've got to be very careful about changes that you make, I think, until you've really seen the turn of the seasons, which I know makes me sound a little bit weird, but you know, winter, there's different things that happen in different terms, and there's different reasons, and you don't quite know why. And so obviously that works really well in agriculture. Of course, you look at the seasons and you say, oh right, that's when that tree does that, or oh, that's when that floods, that's what happens at that point of the year. But similarly in a school, you've got to really work out why things are happening before you decide to change them, and you won't know until you really observe and interact. And then it's
actually,
schools
are seasonal. Schools are very seasonal, I feel. You know, obviously we go through half terms and terms, and you know, we have exam season, and we have the December dip season, which is like, you know, horrendous for most teachers, and like I feel like it's very seasonal, and you're right. And you know, from what I've kind of learned doing courses, and from what I've learned from SLT that I've really enjoyed working with, is that you know, when you're going into a new school, that you should sit back and watch and, like you said, observe for a little bit. Yeah, okay, not forever, obviously you wouldn't be proactive at all, but you know, that kind of observation is really, really useful in actually being a good leader, like a strong leader, somebody that is actually looking to grow their environment rather than kind of nurture, rather than actually kind of stop it growing at all. I don't know. I feel like actually it's really interesting, because going into this, I'll be honest, I was like, I text Jenny and I was like, right, what is permaculture? I've Googled permaculture.
Yeah.
And it's about plants. So I'm not 100% sure, is this the right thing that I'm Googling? And Jenny was like, yeah, no, that is the right thing. And I was like, okay, fair enough. So I'm like interested to hear how this, and now you're saying it, I'm like, oh, I am bought in already.
And it's also, sorry, Jenny. It's about it being a self-supporting system. So if the trees are healthy, they provide the shade, and then et cetera, and they become strong plants. So if you look after and create balance amongst your team, through these small interactions, there's different principles as well, like responding to change, creativity, then everyone becomes a healthy part of that biodiversity, and actually it then starts self-sustaining itself, and actually you almost make yourself obsolete. That's the dream, because the dream is that you don't really need a head teacher, if you ask me. You know, because everyone comes in and they feel empowered to the right degree. You know, we don't just all do whatever we like, because then it's chaos. But you know, we know the systems within which we're functioning, and we can make some really good decisions there, check when we need to, and then come back. And if everyone is in part of that kind of self-sustaining system where they're watering each other, you know, and diversity, which I know we're going to come on to, but you know, there's different teachers that they might not maybe be the most articulate teacher, or they might not be the most that teacher, but if you find out what their strengths are, then you need them. They might be the teacher that always checks in on the head, even though they might always be slightly behind on their marking or something, but they'll be doing something. So if you find out what they're really good at, and then it becomes this self-sustaining system.
But what you're saying, I feel like it's ringing so true to, I was just having a conversation with another mum I was just at football practice with my child, and she was complaining about her new manager, and everything her new manager is doing is everything that you're saying you shouldn't do. So she's come in and day one started questioning her working day and saying, I want to start doing 3 o'clock meetings. And this mum is saying, I pick up my child. I've got it arranged that 3 o'clock is my lunch hour slot, so I can pick up my child. And she's straight away saying, well, I don't like that. And it's like, oh gosh, like, what are you doing? You've already a week in, really frustrated a very good employee who's been there for a very long time. And I also think what you were saying before about this whole funnel system, like every school I've worked at, you know, however senior you are, you get more input into things, even though you're quite often more removed from the situation. So it'll be like, oh, we'll ask the heads of department who teach fewer hours than the classroom teachers what they think about adding an extra period to the school day or something, or, you know, doing a 7-period day instead of a longer 6-period. It's like, why not ask the people? Why not ask everyone, and particularly ask the people that it will affect the most?
Yeah, I've got an interview this Friday for a new Key Stage 2 teacher, and I've got the LSA in the interview, because it's the LSA that's working with them, and she's incredibly valuable. And when I told her that, she had a little cry, actually, because these people aren't asked, are they? They're just told what they're doing.
That's
and
very true.
You know, 6 or 7-period days, you might find that the people who do them will have the right answers to those kinds of questions. I went to a gym recently, and they just renovated the women's and the men's changing rooms, and the women's nobody could reach the lock at the top because they just hadn't designed an 5-foot tall, and it was just like, well, I can't even get my key in, and it was like, who's designed this? It certainly wasn't the people who were actually using it. Yeah, classic.
It was a tall man, apparently.
Yes.
That's like... Oh my god, that's so funny. So you're currently writing a book about governance, I hear. Jenny was telling me. Is that correct?
Well, I've actually written it.
You've written. Okay. Written a book. I was just about to say, you know, beforehand, you really need to write a book on the permaculture and how it is similar to schools.
Yeah, my thinking, it's a bit too out there. So if I pitched that,
It's
everyone
not out
would have your
there.
reaction. They'd go, what? And they'd Google it and go, what? So what I'm hoping is that this
No, you
one
need
is
to
good enough
I think
that they might let
it's,
me.
do you know what? It's the word permaculture that got me. I think once you've actually explained it, I'm like, oh yeah, definitely. And I am not like an out there person. Like I feel like Jenny's way more out there than me. You know, just got her own allotment and stuff like that. Like I'm not that kind of person at all. But yeah, you've got me on board straight away. So I think you should definitely just take the word permaculture out so that you can explain it in the book. You don't have to call it like, how is the school like a tree or something like that.
Well, I was going to say, there's also the Tom. I know it's a different theory because it's to do with curriculum, but there's the Tom Sherrington book, which is all about the learning rainforest, and I read that quite a few years ago, and I really liked all the kind of tree analogies. Like it all made sense.
All the analogies are
about
amazing.
curriculum rather than leadership, but I felt like it was a really sort of similar sort of idea that you need a fully functioning ecosystem and giving people roles, and don't just assume the heads of department create the curriculum. And I think there's something there.
You need to go to your publisher right now and say to them, listen, I'm writing another book on permaculture. Anyway, sorry, I've gone off on a tangent here, but I'm feeling very passionate about permaculture in schools now. So you've written a book about governance. So what do you think good governance looks like?
Well, I've had to write a whole book to explain that. So
just a quick summary.
Actually, it's such a nightmare topic, governance, because there's different layers of governance in schools, and somebody's going to pick this book up and go, well, we don't do it like that. And however much I've kind of said in the introduction, obviously governance, there's variability across the piece. You've got multi-academy trusts, you've got faith schools, you've got federations, etc., with people doing things slightly differently. You know, I've tried to make it as universal as possible, but basically I'm not going to win that. It's so complicated now in the school sector. But I think the word that I would come back to be as brief as possible is it's a mode. So it's a way, it's a mode. So I don't know about you. You've mentioned you've got small children. When I had my three, when they were really young and they were really close in age, you know, so at one point I had like a 1, a 2 and a 4-year-old or something. And I just went into this slightly different mode. It was like, let's get the car seat. Now let's get the nappy bag. And then there'd be one crying and you just go, okay, somebody's crying. And you just kind of go into this slightly zombie. There's nothing I can do about this. I'll just keep moving forward. And that's like the duckling mode, when I had like ducklings. But the governance mode, so it's a different mode to then maybe how you are at your place of work. And so if you can enter into a slightly different mode, and you, in a way, it's really hard to explain because you only kind of know when you get there, and it's a way of kind of floating slightly above, and it's knowing that it's not your job to do it, but it's your job to look at everything and to just kind of go, are you sure? And can you just tell me a bit more about that? And I'm just wondering whether, and then actually you get to walk away and not do any of the work. So it's actually really, it's really great. I'm a trustee of a large charity actually, and it's not the same as being a governor of a school because different sectors. But I really love it because I get to read the papers and I get to kind of just do some thinking, and then I go to the meeting and I go, oh, I read that bit and I was really interested, and I wonder if you could explain why you went for that rather than that. And then they talk about it, the people that are doing the job operationally, and whilst they talk about it, they might go, actually, yeah, I don't know if maybe we could have done it differently. And then the board goes, oh yeah, well, could we actually check that then maybe, you know, those people are involved or whatever. And then guess what? You don't have to do it. They do. They get to leave the meeting. So you just kind of, you know, float above it a bit in this slightly different mode, having, you know, with sharp eyes and with your brain switched on, and kind of mirrors for the leaders. And you go, do you want to just look at that again? And then they have to look at it, and then off they go, having had another think about it. It's really, it will be different in every scenario, but that's kind of one way that
Jenny, you're a school.
Well, yeah, no, I'm just thinking. I'm chairing my first
school chair.
So I'm about to become chair of a school of governors, but tomorrow I'm chairing. Oh, thank you. Tomorrow, as I've been a governor for a while, and tomorrow for the first time, I'm chairing my subcommittee because they're not there. So I'm thinking, oh, okay, I'll take some tips, and then in October I'm starting as the chair of the governors.
So yeah,
I will definitely be buying your book.
Great. It won't be out till November. So
I'll hopefully have the right governance mode for a month, and then I'll read your book and find out that I didn't.
The other thing I will say is it is a contact sport. So being a head teacher, you know, you were saying, oh, having the cheese conversation with the head teacher and me going, well, they're just thinking about 1,000 things. You know, we in these roles, we try and we fail to come into school and be the person that's okay and make sure everyone else is okay. And we really like have so many things to do. And it's just so valuable to every once in a while when the head teacher, you know, if you're a governor and you get the school newsletters, to read the school newsletter and reply to the newsletter and go, gosh, I really like that thing that you said about that you're doing with the pond. You know, I'm really pleased to read that that's happening. That makes a massive difference because parents don't often reply to the good things. They just read the newsletter. And so if the head gets these little bits of feedback from governors, you know, sometimes it could be, I'm really glad that's happening because we discussed it in a meeting, didn't we? And gosh, that really shows the school's going in the right direction. Or as nicely as you possibly can, kind of going, oh, I noticed that there wasn't any girls' football teams this year when you sent out the clubs. Is that something we can have a talk about, you know, or something? But just that little bit of contact is really helpful. Otherwise, you're just whistling into the wind often, head teachers. And we never quite get enough of that kind of feedback. So that's a tip as well. Contact sport.
Because they say, don't they, this whole idea of, you know, it can be lonely at the top. And I feel from speaking to the current chair of the Board of Governors that the key difference between governor and then being chair, this is a small primary school, is that he's quite a regular point of contact with the head teacher, and he's kind of there to, kind of listen to what's going on and to kind of, you know, not kind of give solutions, but hear ideas that she has. And so to kind of, make it a little bit less lonely at the top, and also to kind of provide that really positive feedback.
Yeah, and managing risk. So it does come, there's, I think, looking at risk, not being like really over scrutinizing and going, well, oh, I'm very worried about, you know, that gate all the time, not going on about it, but just thinking about what are the risks for this school, strategically, really stratospherically. You know, is it pupil numbers? Is it the next head teacher? You might have a head teacher who's, you know, 5 years off retirement. That doesn't mean it's the wrong time to start thinking about, well, what's going to happen with succession, because actually it takes ages.
You know, part of the reason me and Jenny wanted to do this podcast, why we wanted to start it off, is to really get people, you know, hopefully far-reaching to as many people as possible to understand what teachers actually need for their well-being, like including being, you know, equal within diversity and inclusion and everything. Like it all makes a massive difference. Obviously we've got 3 women sitting here, so that's another part of diversity. Within schools
we have a national curriculum that really was driven through by somebody who, you know, is a white male. I'm talking about Michael Gove, obviously, you know, who had a very privileged education himself, and he has driven through his own political agenda. And it doesn't marry up with the diversity of the child, and it doesn't marry up with actually developmental stages of children. You know, children don't really understand the concept in terms of times of history until they're about 9 or 10, and yet what we have to try and deliver in the national curriculum doesn't really make sense. And you know, it's who do we have around these tables who are deciding this? And I can tell you, I do some strategic work in Suffolk, bless them, but you know, these are all CEOs and whatever, and they're, you know, I was in a room last term, and you know, I respect them all greatly, but there were 2 women. I was one of 2 women, and the rest were men. You know, there is a real diversity problem in terms of policy and strategy. That's just gender.
And this is the thing. So like, actually, from what I've noticed, and I'm sure there's statistics to back this up, the further that you move up in schools, so like, you know, going into SLT, first of all, it's very male dominated still, which, you know, there's 3 women sitting here. I mean, obviously you've managed to break the glass ceiling, so well done. But you know, I haven't yet. For example, I've gone on a number of SLT interviews and not managed to get an SLT position yet. No, now I'm not saying that's because I'm a woman, but I'm saying that may have played a factor. I don't know. That might have played a factor in me moving up. And then on the other side of things, you know, there's, like you said, that's just one area of diversity. There's so many different areas of diversity that should be considered. So it's very male dominated, and unfortunately, in all of the schools I've worked in, and I remember I've only worked in London schools, which is, one of the most diverse areas in the country. It is usually white males, and God bless their souls, because I'm married to a white male, so I can't really complain too much. But at the same time, I noticed that there's an issue here, like why are people of different ethnicities not getting opportunities? Why are women not getting these same opportunities? Why are we only seeing a white male dominated, SLT? And actually, it really affects the kids, A lot of the kids have expressed, not in my current school, but because actually the head teacher's got a really big drive on diversity in my current school. But in a previous school, some of the kids actually started to say, like, out loud, without being prompted, like, oh, why are there no women like in senior leadership? And I'm like, oh, like trying to make like excuses, but actually really the honest answer is because they're not usually given the opportunities. I spoke about this a couple of it would be a couple of weeks ago now when I released the podcast about the parent tax, paying like the parent tax. And usually women are the ones that are paying this parent tax as well. So once you become a parent, it then becomes really difficult. It becomes more difficult even to go up into kind of the higher job roles. And that's sometimes to do with the flexibility that because right before we started the podcast, you were obviously talking about this idea of like flexibility within the profession, especially head teachers having even the flexibility to have some kind of, what did you call it, Jenny? What's it called? Like co-head teacher role or job share or
different models.
And it just doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist in schools at the moment. I know, Jenny,
I think actually it's about valuing it. So going back to permaculture, one of the 12 principles is valuing diversity. And it's getting people to go, actually, we want somebody different around the table. And that will bring value. So rather than seeing it as a thing we've got to do because it like ticks a box, going, actually it's going to make our school better, and people actually believing that will be the shift. Something that you get from working with nature and things is that you do get that how valuable different plants and everything are to each other. And so if it's a kind of a spiritual shift to genuinely believing that
also
the differences around the table are what will make it better.
Do those plants, I mean, you can answer this, you guys, because you're the agriculturist here, but do the plants do these plants thrive in an area where they've got similar species of plants around them? So
it varies, but what you always need is you need diversity.
So
when somebody says, why is my apple tree not thriving? What can I do to the apple tree? The answer is you don't need to do anything to the apple tree. What's going on around the apple tree? If you've got moths or if you've got whatever, it's like, well then it's the environmental stuff and what's going on around that will be affecting it. Have you built a wall which means it doesn't get the same light this year, or what's happening in the soil, or what are the other attracting plants that are around it, etc. So anything that's going back right to what I started with about monocrop farming. If you wipe out a field and only grow potatoes, you only get potatoes. And if the crop fails, you get nothing. And quite honestly, that's rubbish. So
I'm loving these analogies.
To give my tiny bit of agricultural knowledge here, it's not as good, but talking of, I think it might be potatoes or it might be cauliflower, I can't remember now, but you also can't keep growing the same thing in the same place often. So you might get a really lovely crop of cauliflower one year, but then I call them my allotment elders. I then talk to some of the older people on the allotment and they're like, right, you did really great this year, Jenny, you did some good cauliflower, but you can't do the same, you can't get cauliflower in the exact same spot next year because the soil needs something different. It's part of the recovery of the soil that you actually need to grow a different crop.
So in permaculture, we talk a lot about nitrogen fixers. So beans are nitrogen fixers. So they're plants that put nitrogen back into the soil. And so going back to, what I said about the teacher that maybe doesn't get their marking done. So they don't look like they're the shiny special teacher, but actually quietly they're doing something else. And it's finding out that value. And it's genuinely valuing the diversity because you need them all. Yeah.
Oh my God.
On
So
that
good.
point, before we get to the kind of last section, the get in the bin, how for people that are listening to this thinking, I'm at a school where I don't think the senior leaders value diversity, I think it's tokenistic or it's not even really there. How do you start to get people that don't value diversity to start realizing the value of it?
Oh, that's a big one. I think
toughie.
I mean, getting people to see the world differently is a really hard thing to do. So I don't know if I have the answer to that. It'll be experiences that they come up against. I mean, I suppose maybe modeling it with children. So at the school that I've arrived at this year, which I love and is fantastic. So I don't want this to come across as negative because it's really fantastic. But when I first arrived there, they really hold dear their school meeting where children get to come with an idea about improving the school or whatever. And they believe that was really special and really democratic. And it is conceptually, but normally there were about the same children talking about the same thing. So it wasn't actually really listening to everyone. And so then it's me, I've tried to talk to staff, etc., and go, it would be really good if we could maybe go into smaller groups and hear a bit more from the younger children, and then bringing those ideas in and then implementing what their ideas are, because it was very older child dominated. And so actually hearing from the younger children, they were like, but we just want a box of dinosaurs in the playground. And so and now I look out at our playground, and yes, it's got the football, but it's also got the basketball, and it's got ping pong, and it's got table tennis, and it's got the kids over there with the little bits of fabric, and we've bought more loose play stuff, and it's become this like amazing patchwork of diversity. So maybe doing something that shows that it works, but you can't just do big paradigm shifts on people. It just doesn't work.
No. I guess I'm just thinking, bringing all the different questions together, is that kind of also something a governor can do, that they could look at something and then maybe with some of the questions they may be asking searching questions of the head teacher that might make them evaluate some small things and make some shifts.
Yeah, well, a really good question is who isn't represented, who hasn't been represented in this discussion. So say leaders come in and they go, oh, it's really great, we're going to do more orienteering in the school because everyone says they want to do it. Just asking as governors, who's been asked there, and have the teachers been asked, and what about the TAs that also help with PE, have they been asked? So just kind of checking. It might be totally fine, but it's just kind of continually going, have we checked with everyone, and who have we checked with there, and who is not being represented? Sports is a really tension area because it's competitive. And then it's got the, how do you balance being really good and getting really good and being competitive, but also being really inclusive and letting people experience sport, because, moving your body is just so fantastic and healthy. And getting that balance right is a really good one to talk about, actually. So yeah, as governors, it's really that, those kinds of conversations. You'll have values on your website. You'll have this, we are an inclusive school. So, it's using those and going, well, we say we're an inclusive school. Can you talk to me about sports day? Can you talk to me about the plan to do whatever it is? How is that actually genuinely inclusive, and are all children involved? It is a really good question.
Okay, well, I think that leads quite nicely actually to our get in the bin section. So every week we do a little get in the bin. So we've asked Rebecca this week to come up with what would she like to chuck away, and what would she like to put in its place. So Rebecca, over to you.
Honestly, I could have an hour. So I'm going to sneak in two, if that's all right. So the first one is children putting their fingers on their lips and walking down the corridor.
Does that happen?
No.
Yes. Go to schools and there's like children and they walk down the corridor.
Oh no.
Oh, wow.
And in terms of what the solution is just calm down. There's so much noise, so much, right, everyone dinner, stop talking, dinner. If everyone, there's a really interesting thing called the low arousal approach, which actually comes from supporting people who are autistic, and that side of things. But it's really fantastic, and it's about low sensory, calming it down. Children don't need to put their fingers on their lips, and they don't need to be constantly told to be quiet, because if you just get everyone calm walking down the corridor, actually it will be quite quiet. So I'll just throw that in the bin. But the other one that I have to mention is single word judgments, obviously. So single word judgments in Ofsted inspections are just the most ridiculous thing. They just create, loads of stress in the system, and we're already an incredibly stressed system, and there's just no point. They don't achieve anything.
So
they say that parents need them. Parents don't. You've already got a child at the school, and then the judgment changes. Oh, I really needed that. Like, you definitely don't need it.
This has been in the news, hasn't it?
Yeah. I need to choose a school for my child.
So Labour have said if they come in, so Keir Starmer the other day said that if Labour come into power, they want to take away the single word judgments, and they want to turn it more into a report style. I was like, oh, I'm interested to see what that would be like, but more of a report style judgment, because it's been in the news because they were debating whether they were going to take away the single word judgments, and then they were like, nah, we're going to keep them in. So
that's right. We did a big piece of research in the east of England with leaders around Ofsted, and 89% of them said that the highest priority thing that needs to change in the framework is single word judgments, because it's destructive and not constructive to the system.
Oh, 100%. I totally agree with you. And we have actually had another podcast episode on Ofsted specifically, and we did speak about the single word judgments as well. And actually, I think Jenny's getting the bin from that one was to just have it as a pass or a fail, if I remember correctly, Jenny.
No, I think the point I was making was I didn't like you're good, you're outstanding.
Yeah. So take it away.
Serious concerns, and the children's safety, there's safeguarding issues, bullying issues. Everyone can't get through, so therefore some might be
in need of support. If a school is in need of support, then offer them support and say that the school is in need of support. With what we have to handle, if we haven't really done everything, it's not because we're terrible, it's probably because we need a bit of help. So let's just say that.
So I think we're all in agreement here as well, as 3 teachers sitting on this podcast, that we don't like the single word judgments. So hopefully that changes at some point in the future. Oh, thank you so much, Rebecca. This has been such an interesting conversation. I've really, really enjoyed it. You definitely need to get to the publisher and ask them to do a book on.
I'll let my editor know.
Your editor, sorry. You need to talk to your editor and be like, right, Jenny and Roxy approved, tick.
And they'll be like, Jenny and Roxy who? You haven't heard of them.
Yes, exactly that. But no, it's been really lovely having you on the Happy Teach Pod, and we would definitely have you back to have even more talks about stuff, I'm sure, in the future. But thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Rebecca.
Thanks for having me.